At the moment, commitment doesn't constitute delivery. 50% of commitments are not delivered on time.
And Ukrainian officials say those delays have a high cost: land and lives. They're demanding Western aid move faster. Welcome to Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Also on the program, the possible beginnings of a deal that could lead to a temporary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. But no matter what, the city of Rafah stays in the crosshairs. Plus, shipping issues in the Red Sea spill over to grocery store shelves.
From China to the Netherlands, India, Canada, and the US, trade is being used in negotiation and exerting political pressure.
And British retailers are left to calm consumers' ultimate fear: a life without tea. In Kyiv today, the human toll of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine was put into sharp focus, with President Volodymyr Zelensky revealing tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been killed to date. 3 years into the fighting and recovering from recent setbacks on the battlefield, the Ukrainian leader remains resolute that his country will win the war against Russia. But that victory, he says, depends on aid from Western allies. Margaret Evans reports.
There's a long wall on the street leading to the golden domes of St. Michael's Monastery in the center of Kyiv. It's called the Wall of Memory, addressed in the faces of Ukraine's fallen soldiers, a place for people to mourn. Today, at a government conference just across from the church, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that 31,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed since Russia's full-scale invasion of the country 2 years ago, a rare disclosure and less than half of American estimates. Asked if Ukraine will win, he told journalists that it depends on Western allies and the military aid they've promised. If we are well armed, if we have weapons, we will not lose this war, he said, because all the backward steps that Vladimir Putin makes, they'll have a huge impact on his society. Zelensky said the European Union has only provided 30% of 1 million promised ammunition shells, and Ukraine is still waiting on a big military aid package held up by the U.S. Congress. His defense minister, Rustem Umerov, calculated the costs of those kinds of delays.
50% of commitments are not delivered on time. So basically, whatever committed that doesn't come on time will lose people, will lose territories.
The human cost is impossible to ignore along the Wall of Memory, not just on the pictures that line it, but in the pain etched across the faces of the living. People take great care of it. One man who lost a son-in-law coming regularly to light any of the candles along the street that have gone out. One soldier, call sign mechanic, walks the wall with his wife. He joined the army when Russian tanks were rolling towards Kyiv at the start of the invasion. Now he trains soldiers in the field, and he's worried about them. They're getting 8 mortar rounds per day, he says. The Russians have hundreds per day. It's not enough. He also says Ukrainian soldiers in the front don't have enough artillery ammunition to protect them. They're sitting in the trenches in the cold, and the Russians are pushing and pushing, he says. Volodymyr Zelensky told the conference he's expecting Russia to prepare counter-offensive actions around May. He also said Western allies know Ukraine needs support within a month. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Kyiv.
Meanwhile, in neighboring Poland, Canadian troops have been training Ukrainian and Polish soldiers. The CBC's Evan Dyer has been touring a medical base just outside of Warsaw and brings us this report.
In a muddy field somewhere in Poland, Ukrainian troops are learning from Polish and Canadian instructors how to dress wounds, apply a tourniquet to stop bleeding, and medevac a casualty, all skills they may soon need on the front line in their country. They come from all civilian walks of life, and many are significantly older than the average recruit in other armies.
The Russian military is actually targeting medical assets, so basically the Ukrainians do not fly the Red Cross because it just makes them a high-value target.
Major Heath Robson says the trainees are serious and dedicated, but short on equipment.
They're needing to improvise a lot, to the point where they're even using doors, like house doors, to use as stretchers, for example.
Canadian troops have been donating first aid kits, but Ukraine's needs go far beyond bandages and tourniquets, says its Minister of Strategic Industries, Alexander Kamishin.
So the need is the whole range of weapon and ammunition, starting with armored vehicles and artillery shells, finishing with drones.
NATO countries have promised to provide 1 million drones this year, but NATO has admitted that an earlier promise to provide 1 million shells for Ukraine's 155mm howitzers by March won't be met. That's why Ukraine is pressing NATO countries to sign long-term agreements that can give it more predictability.
The West is there for the long haul.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says failure to deliver could force Ukraine to the negotiating table.
If there is a negotiated peace now or in a year to come, that'll just give Russia a few years to remobilize, to rearm, and then to complete the job that they failed to complete 2 years ago when they hoped to take Kyiv.
And so Canada will give Ukraine $320 million worth of military assistance this year, as well as backstopping $2.4 billion in loans through the IMF. The EU has given 50 billion euros, but a $60 billion US package of aid and arms from Washington is being blocked by Republicans. Christian Luprecht of the Royal Military College in Kingston says if that aid doesn't come, Ukraine faces tough choices.
What we see is that we need a plan B in case the Congress in the United States doesn't come through, in case there's a President Trump that gets elected, and in case the Ukrainians cannot hold the defensive lines.
The soldiers here know they'll be badly outnumbered at the front, and they know that lack of ammunition was one of the reasons for Ukraine's recent withdrawal from the town of Avdiivka, now in Russian hands. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Warsaw.
There appears to be new momentum in talks toward a temporary ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The U.S. says the basic outline of a deal has been reached. At the same time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says an offensive into Gaza's southernmost city of Rafah will go ahead, with or without a deal. Katie Simpson reports.
Smoke and dust fill the air on a busy street in Rafah. There are dozens of people sorting through the aftermath of what witnesses say was an Israeli airstrike on a house, killing at least 7 people, wounding dozens more. There are no safe places here, says 20-year-old Fatima. She goes on to describe seeing dead bodies and body parts scattered in the debris as people screamed for help. What's happening to us is not fair, says 19-year-old Mustafa. Where's the humanity, he asks. The Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza says at least 89 people were killed in a 24-hour span this weekend. It's unclear how many of the dead were civilians and or fighters. Fighting continues as negotiations over a temporary ceasefire and hostage release deal appear to be making progress, according to Jake Sullivan, the U.S. National Security Advisor.
It is true that the representatives of Israel, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar met in Paris and came to an understanding among the 4 of them about what the basic contours of a hostage deal for temporary ceasefire would look like.
The U.S. wants to see that momentum carried into a new round of talks, expected to start as early as Monday in Qatar. While he would not get into specifics, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Hamas needs to abandon some of its demands in order for a deal to be reached.
I can't tell you if we'll have it, but if Hamas goes down from its delusional claims and goes down, can bring them down to earth, then we'll have the progress that we all want.
Netanyahu says whether there's a deal or not, eventually, Israel will continue with its effort to destroy Hamas and is planning to move ahead with military operations in Rafah, the city where more than 1 million displaced civilians have been seeking shelter, the place they were supposed to be safe.
We can't leave the last Hamas stronghold without taking care of it. Obviously, we have to do it.
Netanyahu says the Israeli government is working on evacuation plans to protect civilians. But given the widespread destruction across the Gaza Strip after nearly 5 months of war, there are fewer and fewer places people can go safely. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Thousands of people in Sao Paulo, Brazil, rallied in support of former far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. He is at the center of several criminal investigations. That includes a probe into an alleged coup attempt after his 2022 election loss to President Luiz Lula da Silva. Bolsonaro is accused of editing a draft decree to overturn election results, pressuring military leaders to join a coup, and plotting to arrest a Supreme Court justice. He's also been banned from running for office until 2030 for spreading election misinformation. Bolsonaro has denied any wrongdoing and says the investigations are politically motivated. Donald Trump is celebrating his latest win in his bid to become the Republican candidate in this year's U.S. presidential election. He trounced Nikki Haley in her home state of South Carolina last night. But Haley is, so far, ignoring calls to step out of the race. Paul Hunter is in South Carolina and tells us where it all goes from here.
That is really something.
Even as they were still counting votes in South Carolina, Donald Trump declared a victory in that state's Republican primary. An easy win, even on home turf for his only significant challenger, the state's former governor, Nikki Haley.
We got double the number of votes.
For Trump, it all but seals the deal on his bid to be that party's nominee for the White House this fall. Though Nikki Haley was having none of it.
I couldn't be more worried about America. It seems like our country is falling apart.
Pledging to stay in the contest despite Trump's big win.
I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president. I'm a woman of my word. I'm not giving up this fight.
But the Republican establishment is piling on, urging Haley to reverse that position and now call it quits. Drew McKissick is South Carolina's Republican Party chair. Here's his message to Haley.
I think at this point you got to do a lot of soul searching, no doubt about it, because you reach a certain point where if you go too far, you begin to do yourself politically more harm than good.
There's really no pathway.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham also wants to clear the field for Trump.
She has a lot to be proud of, but we need to come together as quick as we can.
From here, everything moves to Michigan for the next state primary on Tuesday. Trump is expected to win there as well. But most Republicans are keen on having him worry less about Nikki Haley and focus on the bigger challenge this fall, U.S. President Joe Biden. Biden himself faces a challenge in Michigan on Tuesday.
I'm not sure what we're going to see on Tuesday, to tell you the truth.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who leads Biden's campaign in that state, had a message of her own for Michigan Democrats, where some Muslim and Arab Americans say Biden has failed to stand up for Palestinians in Gaza and are urging Democrats to hold off voting for Biden to send him a message on that. Whitmer warns.
I just want to make the case, though, that it's important not to lose sight of the fact that any vote that's not cast for Joe Biden supports a second Trump term. A second Trump term would be devastating.
And on that, the Michigan primary awaits. Paul Hunter, CBC News, Charleston, South Carolina.
Still ahead, a subarctic dream more than a century in the making. Ottawa and Manitoba are pouring tens of millions of dollars into the port of Churchill with the hopes of making it a major shipping hub for the future. We'll tell you why officials are betting big on this once busy port. That story is coming up on Your World Tonight. At Toronto's York University, about 3,000 academic workers say their wages are in a losing race against rising prices. And if the school doesn't address the affordability crisis, they're going on strike tomorrow. As Sarah McMillan tells us, what's happening at York is a sign of bigger problems in Canada's post-secondary sector.
Going on strike is a sacrifice, and it's not something that I think any workers do lightly.
Zoe Newman is a contract faculty member at York and part of CUPE's bargaining committee. She says low wages and skyrocketing cost of living in Toronto are making it next to impossible for members to get by.
Many of the members have to work 2 and 3 jobs. Many of our members rely on food banks just to survive.
Well, I think we will see quite a bit of labor tension over the next little while.
Glenn Jones is a professor of higher education at the University of Toronto. He says colleges and universities across Canada are facing financial pressures, particularly in Ontario, where government funding per student is well below the national average and where tuition fees have been frozen since 2019. To top it off, a recent move by the federal government to cap international students, which Jones says will hit Ontario, BC, and Nova Scotia the hardest.
The impact on at least some of these institutions is going to be quite catastrophic.
Ontario's provincial government is set to announce around $1.2 billion in funding for the post-secondary sector, according to a government source. Nigmendra Narain is president of the Ontario Confederation of University Faculty Associations. He says he's happy to hear more funding is on the way, but
this is a drop in the bucket compared to what our institutions actually need to succeed.
Meanwhile, in Quebec, English language universities are facing a crisis of their own, with a provincially imposed tuition hike on all out-of-province students. This week, news that McGill and Concordia universities are launching separate lawsuits against the Quebec government. Concordia University President Graham Carr.
We are currently seeing a 27% decline in applications from the rest of Canada and a 12% decline in applications from international undergraduate students. And we have never seen anything remotely like that in our history.
Back in Ontario, Glenn Jones says this is a distinct moment for the post-secondary sector as a whole.
It's as challenging as I've ever seen it, I think, if you put all these things together.
He says there's only so much institutions can do without significant provincial investment. Sarah McMillan, CBC News, Toronto.
A week ago, we told you the Rideau Canal Skateway in Ottawa was opening. Tonight, it's closing for the rest of the season. There has been a string of sporadic openings, but all in all, it was only open for 10 days this year, the shortest season ever, except for last year when it never opened at all. And it's all because of mild conditions. A long-awaited bill aimed at curbing online hate speech will be tabled tomorrow in Ottawa. The federal Liberals say it'll protect kids from harm. The Conservatives argue it limits free speech. As Rafi Boudjikanian reports, there is already a feeling in Ottawa the debate over this bill will be heated and prolonged.
Our online public space is not always a safe space.
That warning by then Justice Minister David Lametti, it was in 2021 when the Liberal government introduced its initial version of the online harms bill
to address hate speech and hate crimes.
But it was hardly debated in the House of Commons before Prime Minister Justin Trudeau dissolved Parliament, launching Canadians into an election, promising to reintroduce the bill should they win. Since that time, it's been mired in consultations with community groups, tech giants, and academics who all expressed concerns of what the government proposed, including forcing social media sites to refer suspected hate speech to law enforcement or to remove such posts within 24 hours.
It does incentivize over-removal of content.
Emily Laidlaw is the Canada Research Chair in Cybersecurity Law at the University of Calgary, and one of the experts the Liberals consulted on the bill.
That regime in 2021 would have incentivized over-removal of anything that had just even the whiff of political controversy.
But Laidlaw and other experts have been pushing Ottawa to introduce a reformed bill.
There should be a special duty to children, criminal conduct, intimate image abuse, child sexual exploitation. These would be the key things for which content removal would be appropriate.
CBC News has confirmed Ottawa will create a new regulator to hold online platforms accountable for harmful content. Earlier this week, Trudeau hinted Monday's bill will include a focus on minors.
Kids are vulnerable online to hatred, to violence.
Welcome words for Owen Charters with Boys and Girls Club Canada.
We think companies have accountability and responsibility. We hope this bill holds them accountable for that, quite specifically around issues from age verification to better scrutiny.
But if the Liberals thought their new law will pass without a hitch,
we will oppose
Justin Trudeau's latest attack on freedom of expression.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has made it clear he's drawing a battle line, saying the Prime Minister has no standing accusing anyone of hate, given how he's been caught dressing in blackface on 3 different occasions before he entered politics. Incidents Trudeau apologized for once they surfaced.
What he should actually do is look into his own heart and ask himself why he was such a hateful racist.
Trudeau accused Poilievre of making personal attacks, but all this could just be a hint of how acrimonious the debate in Parliament may become on Monday when the bill is scheduled to be tabled. Rafi Boudjikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
In northern Manitoba, a century-old vision is being reimagined. The town of Churchill is trying to position itself as a modern-day shipping hub. Cameron McIntosh explains why officials believe it's Churchill's time.
Even with the Port of Churchill sealed off by thick Hudson Bay ice until August, trains idle outside, carrying supplies. This summer, they'll carry up zinc ore.
We have a vision.
Churchill Mayor Mike Spence is betting the early 20th century vision of Churchill as a subarctic hub will finally be met here in the 21st century.
We'll see this port grow, prosper.
Spence is the chair of Arctic Gateway Group, an Indigenous-led consortium of northern communities and First Nations that's refurbishing the Port of Churchill and rail line leading to it. The consortium envisioning demand for northern resources like zinc and lithium, paired with a warming climate, will finally establish Churchill as a vital shipping gateway.
We're on to big, big opportunities that lay ahead of us.
The provincial and federal governments are buying into that idea, putting another $60 million into upgrades into the port and rail line, on top of $133 million promised 2 years ago. Dan Vandel is Federal Minister of Northern Affairs.
Hudson's Bay Railway is the backbone of northern Manitoba, and this is our collective national and global interest.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew calling it a critical maritime link.
It's really going to be a mix of goods moving through the port that help to ensure the long-term viability.
Prophecies of prosperity in Churchill are nothing new. In the 1920s, tracks were laid across Manitoba's northern tundra to link the prairie grain belt to the Arctic Ocean. Because of Churchill's northern latitude, it's shorter to ship from Manitoba to Europe than other ports further south, like Montreal. For decades, climate, geography, economics, and politics all worked against Churchill. But in 2024, optimism stems from contracts signed to ship out grain, zinc ore, even bring in a cruise ship, while resupply ships bring goods into the north. All part of a locally led vision, says Spence.
What makes us so special is northern Indigenous people coming together.
But the Hudson Bay ice currently locking the port in is more than symbolic of the challenges ahead. Even in a warming climate, the season is short. In an environmentally sensitive area, there's debate over what can and should be shipped from Churchill, including oil and natural gas. Spence isn't ruling anything out, but
one thing that we'll be certain about, the environment is critical.
The idea, adds Kinew, is to focus on local resources.
I'm always going to put my bets on those products that build wealth right here in our province.
A bet first made a century ago that's always faced odds almost as long as the ice season. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, Winnipeg.
A Saskatchewan family is $5 million richer thanks to a mysterious case of hockey cards. It was discovered in their attic, forgotten for decades, containing thousands of unopened O-Pee-Chee brand hockey cards from the year 1979 to 1980, the year Wayne Gretzky was a rookie. There could be 27 Gretzky cards in the case, but no one knows for sure. About 15 bidders took part in the auction, which came down to a Canadian and an American until the Canadian won. The family has stayed anonymous, but they also found enough cases of baseball cards to fill a van. Those haven't gone to auction yet. You are listening to Your World Tonight from CBC News. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can hear Your World Tonight and other CBC radio programs wherever you are on your favorite podcast app. There's almost nothing the Brits love more than a good cuppa. So it was no surprise that reports of a black tea shortage at UK stores led to nationwide anxiety. Disruptions to trade on the Red Sea are causing shipping delays. Just one example of how global events are upending our fragile supply chain. Lauren Sproul spills the tea on that from London.
From the windy decks of a cargo ship in the Red Sea to a small warehouse in Reading, England, the majority of the UK's tea is transported via a trade route that has come under attack by Houthi rebels, making the long journey even longer.
There were some teas which were expected before Christmas, and we are still waiting for them.
Niraj Agarwal and his wife Vishaka are the co-founders of Tea People, a social enterprise that processes, packages, and sells tea all over the world, even Canada.
I mean, when they attacked, it was, we just thought, okay, they'll attack a few ships here and there, and then we've tried our best to protect our customers and, tried our best to not pass down cost. It's, at the end of the day, business, world politics will affect a business like ours, which is, international.
To get to the UK, tea shipments must now travel around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. But it hasn't completely stifled the flow of supply, just slowed the drip.
5 to 6 weeks normally we would have received it, but now it's taking about 8 weeks or longer.
The Agarwals and other tea suppliers in the UK are using creative inventory management to mitigate the supply issues, and say there's little fear of the situation boiling over.
The whole issue is a bit of a storm in a teacup,
says Tom Holder of the British Retail Consortium.
Frankly, the Red Sea has had minimal impact on the supply of tea, and anyone who's gone to the supermarket in recent days will see the aisles full of tea.
While the beloved British cuppa will be protected by the UK's robust inventory, other commodities like home appliances, automobiles, and grain are casualties of an increasingly delicate global supply chain.
The disruption is unfortunately just going to get wider, broader, and deeper over time.
Marco Forgione is the Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade.
The first business to announce that they had supply chain issues was IKEA, the furniture company. That was quickly followed by Next, which is a clothes retailer.
Forgione says the rate for shipping containers, insurance, and the cost of hiring a crew for the extra weeks it takes to transport the goods are all likely to result in higher prices.
There's only one person who ever pays, and that's the consumer.
A personal price to pay for a global issue.
From China to the Netherlands, India, Canada, and the US, it's very clear that trade is being used as a useful tool in negotiation and exerting political pressure.
It's not only geopolitics. Climate issues are also putting pressure on major trade routes, like the Panama Canal, which is in the midst of a history-making drought.
The world is changing, and what's happening with tea, just an early indication of what the future is going to be, not just for the UK and the EU, but for global markets.
Lauren Sproul, CBC News, London.
This ain't Texas.
By now you know Beyoncé has branched out into country with this instant hit, Texas Hold'em. But if you were a child in Canada, or you had kids here, particularly in the late 90s, early 2000s, you might be wondering why Texas Hold'em has got you thinking less about a world-famous superstar and more about a certain red cap and neckerchief wearing turtle.
Hey, it's Franklin, coming over to play.
There it is, the theme song to Canadian kids show Franklin, performed by celebrated Canadian musician Bruce Cockburn. CBC Kids News did a deep dive on this important topic after a producer discovered that even her Google Home was mistaking one song for another.
Hey Google, play the Franklin theme song.
All right, playing the album Texas Hold'em on Spotify.
This ain't Texas.
In speaking to an expert, the CBC Kids team learned the bouncing banjo sound at the start of both songs is in the same D major key and uses the same playing style, called Travis picking, and that regular Beyoncé listeners might not be familiar with that style, so their brains automatically recall something familiar, Franklin.
Here he comes with all his friends.
When you break it down, the songs are pretty different. They don't have the same melody or lyrics. But Texas Hold'em actually does have a Canadian connection. Calgary musician Lowell is a co-writer. So here's some more from her.
I get so deep inside my thoughts, you pull me out of them.
This is Lowell with Hampton's City Cowboy on Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Thanks for listening.
You're just my downtown.